And welcome to Adweek Together, our daily live show where we talk with industry experts about how brands and marketers can advance through this crisis. I'm Jess Zafarris, Adweek's audience engagement editor, and I'm here with John Holdridge, general manager of brand services at Fullscreen, a social content company that provides creative, strategy, and marketing services for brands. Today, we're talking about the ways that social strategies have shifted in recent days and how brands can strike the right tone, build community, and be a resource for consumers both during the pandemic and as we progress. Fullscreen recently developed a social media playbook to help out small businesses with this particular challenge, and John is here to share some of the key takeaways, lessons, and strategies from it. So, John, what prompted the creation of this playbook, and why do you think it's so important for small businesses to focus on their social strategy during this time?
Yeah, definitely. So look, we work a ton with large brick and mortar brands and media publishers. And it's not to say that they've got, necessarily a competitive advantage, but when it does come to sort of the ability to already have sort of large built-in audiences and have dollars to sort of support pivots, we kind of spent a few nights, sleepless nights thinking, there's so many people that are also getting impacted right now in terms of, not only just large brands. And so we really started to think about small businesses and starting to think about the mom and pops. And the reality of it is that there's a lot that are sort of near and dear to all of our hearts. We all have a local restaurant we love right around the corner. We've all got that sort of small family shop that we all go to. And so as a company, we just wanted to do right and kind of come up with something for those small business owners, because look, this is a massive time of pivot and change for them. And we felt like they're impacted, more than anyone else at this current time from the business angle and from figuring out sort of how to navigate a really rocky landscape.
What are some ways that you've seen some of these smaller brands shifting to meet the crisis?
So I think, look, we've seen a lot about support local. I think all of us have seen that in different states across the country. And what I've really loved to see from a restaurant standpoint is thinking about sort of a 20-seat restaurant. Or 20-table restaurant, I should say. That's all of a sudden gone for them, right? And they sort of rely on potentially filling 80 to 90% of that capacity every night in order to probably get by and sort of manage the bills each month and sort of them as the owner to make some money, but also be able to pay their employees. And so their strategies have had to pivot, right? They're not able to have dine-in anymore, so they're moving to delivery or takeout. So it really was to start to get smart and savvy around leaning into social, start to tell the story potentially about the family behind the business or the individuals who started it or the employees that work there, or why, in this restaurant's case that I'm referencing, there's an Italian spot I go to down the street, what makes their food so good, right? And so it really became an interesting time where those businesses often really weren't storytellers on social and broadly. And that's a really interesting, powerful pivot that they were able to make, was that right now, the human nature, we're looking for connectivity, right? Because all of us are somewhat in isolation. And so to connect with those businesses and then sort of feel that connection and then want to support them through either a delivery or takeout is a great strategy, right? It kind of creates that connectivity without having to go dine in.
Absolutely. We've seen a lot of big brands aiming to sort of carry it to the next level by giving back to the community in these times. And obviously doing good for the community is great since everybody needs support. So we saw Burger King France worked with the agency David Madrid to create a promotion offering free post-lockdown birthday parties to about 500 kids. And they got such a huge response on social using the hashtag #unhappybirthday. That they extended it to 100 more people. It was really cool. And then Heinz announced an initiative, speaking of sort of the local level, to send $2,000 checks to 500 of the diners across the country. And they had like a $1 million fund, and they asked social followers to nominate their favorite neighborhood spot supported by the hashtag #StandWithDiners, which was really cool. But not every brand, especially those local brands, has the reach or funds to throw $1 million at an initiative during this time. So what are some strategies that you would suggest for small businesses who want to support consumers and remain open and communicative during this time?
Yeah, I think, look, the first thing is be sensitive to consumers' new reality. It is daunting for the consumer right now. And so I think as a big brand, if you don't have sort of those dollars, just think about sort of the sensitivities that everyone's going through, right? I think more than anything, we know that there's sort of this recessionary impact happening right now, as we're seeing with unemployment and so forth. And so that's obviously going to impact the consumer's ability to purchase and kind of take, action against things. But there's also this kind of human element. And so we really want to make sure that they're delivering value, they're sort of fostering connectivity, and really more than anything, being empathetic. I think, just to kind of dovetail off of those two great examples, it wasn't done in sort of an ad or a clip, but, Shake Shack had done something really powerful where they were given a $10 million loan to sort of support themselves through COVID, but they gave it back, right? Because they were just simply in a monetary position to do that. And they said, look, use that $10 million and deploy that against small businesses. So I think that's a really great sort of tone. And that's a really great way to kind of think about giving back to small businesses. And then, it trickles down to the consumer that will see things like that not only then will support Shake Shack in this, but would, then go and double down and support their local business that they love as well.
On the flip side, what are some examples that you've maybe seen or heard of what not to do?
I think the biggest thing that sort of falls flat on its face right now is those that try to be authentic and miss the boat. We've seen a couple pickup strategies recently with some brands who have kind of released a certain sort of marketing sprint in the early year and then kind of went dormant with it and then tried to pick it up. It just felt like it was too forceful, right? It kind of felt tone deaf to me. I'm talking specifically a little bit about how I felt kind of the planters, the baby planter nut was sort of something that felt like it kind of felt flat to me, I think. So there are those instances where, look, this is a moment where all of us are zigging and zagging in real time. And so I quite frankly think you've got to really be smart and throw out the playbook right now. I think all of us are sort of exhausted hearing about, getting through COVID and what brands are going to do. And I know that's kind of, we're all in this lockdown situation to figure out what it's going to look like. But I think the smartest brands right now are the ones that are not sort of reeling a little bit in what's happening right now, but actually thinking more about what's the world going to look like? Where's the puck going? What is life going to look like after this? How can I start to tell a more significant story about what we're going to do in life beyond? And I think that's a really powerful change to sort of take the tone deaf into being something that's very real and authentic at this moment.
Absolutely. And speaking of tone, let's talk a little bit about developing that. In the playbook, you say that brands need to tread lightly and ensure that the focus remains on sensitive messaging, leaning on their core tenets of influence. Talk a little bit about those core tenets, if you wouldn't mind, and how a small business can strike that correct tone.
Yeah, definitely. So I think, look, a core tenet for us always was just be true and authentic to yourself. And a lot of times that's something that people will say all the time, probably in these settings, but that's actually really harder to do than just to say. And so what that means is, if you're a local donut shop, be a local donut shop, sort of embrace what that is, connect kind of to the consumer and the fact that that's who you are, and really think about the fact that what makes this world so interesting is the long tail effect. Right? We do know that there are Fortune sort of 500 brands that are out there, but there's this amazing long tail that's been created. And that's sort of what we see that allows us to have options and selectivity. And so being really authentic, being niche in sort of your vertical and what you do is really powerful. Secondly, think about the fact that there's an emotionality right now. All of us feel vulnerable. And so there's quite frankly a lot of connectivity you can create sort of to lean into the emotional aspect of the consumer by being a brand. And so I think, look, don't try to do something that feels like you have to sort of attempt to be emotional. Just be real, be authentic. I mean, seeing even going into the entertainment space, a lot of these night talk show hosts for the night shows are doing a brilliant job of leaning into a bit of some vulnerability. right? Letting things kind of happen where there's a silly thing happening in the background and they're going live at that moment. Like that's where we're all at, right? This is us in my in my setting. And I think as small business owners, that emotionality is something that's so key. And then third is, keep it really simple. Social, connecting with brands, thinking of sort of navigating these pivots is really complex. But if you can keep a good tone, a good consistency, and you can keep it simple, that does everything. And so I don't think right now we have to totally be so complex in our strategies. We have to just think about what's impacting us on a day-to-day human level and just lean into those key elements. And that's a pretty simple thing because we feel a handful of emotions, but there's probably a few that all of us could say are very relatable to each other right now.
Absolutely. Speaking of kind of a different tone and a lighter tone, Coors Light recently released a spot where they went with a bit of a different one with it for a free beer promotion inspired by a 93-year-old lady who asked for more beer and then went viral, where you can nominate for someone for a free 6-pack on social. And they tossed aside the usual talk of these on certain times and went for something a little sillier. So let's take a look at that spot.
Fighting a revolutionary war can be sucky. But do you know how George Washington kept his troops motivated? He made sure his men had beer. How about the Great Depression? It turns out that was pretty sucky too. But you know what they did? They called for an end to prohibition. Did it solve anything? Of course not. But it did help them press on. Which brings us to today. Suckiness of historical proportions. Now, we know this won't fix it, but how about some beer? Go to @Coors Light on Twitter and tell us who could use a 6-pack and we'll buy them one. Because if history's taught us anything, it's that sometimes we could all just use a beer.
So not everybody could get away with saying just how sucky everything is, but that kind of worked for Coors Light. How does that relate to what you were saying about your core tenets of influence?
I think that leans into the emotionality of it, of kind of the human nature, right? Look, I think everyone right now at probably before noon in whatever time zone they are thinking about having a drink. And so I think that's just a funny, relatable thing that just strikes an emotional chord with all of us. So I definitely tip the hat to Coors. And as you said, Jess, not everyone can get away with that, but I think pretty timely, right? Pretty poignant and pretty real time with sort of the key emotions that we're going through at this moment.
We had a report recently that people sort of went through something like the 5 stages of grief. It was pretty interesting during the crisis. And I think that sort of reflects what we've seen, that messaging has changed a little bit and what people connect with has changed during the lockdown just over the past 3 weeks. Would you agree with that? And do you think that people might be getting fatigued with certain types of messaging? And what do you think they're going to be looking at next?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's spot on. I think probably I even caught myself at one point in the denial phase there. So of one of the 5 stages that this was real life. But look, even as I say this to you and the audience, like I don't take away from the fact that there's a pandemic going on, and that's a real thing. And there are lives that are being lost, and the frontline people, I give my heart out to and, pray to them. They're the real heroes in this, right? Fighting everything. But having said that, what I want to sort of emphasize is that a lot of us are feeling very COVIDed out. That's not a real phrase, but that is really where we're feeling. I think a lot of us are at a point where we're really thinking about sort of what does life look like after this? How do we get back to things? And I think the pontification that brands and media publishers and entertainments and agencies need to do right now is to think about, we're going to enter a new norm that will look drastically different forever. And it doesn't matter for how long, but I don't think we're getting back to a sort of normal life ever again. And that means that basically the playbook that all of us have created, the marketing 101 playbooks, the sort of how to approach social, everything, light a match to that, right? Even as you think about physical production and huge expenditures around that. We've seen small iPhone, commercial spots have more impact now than ever before. And why not that be the future norm? So I do think something that is really key for us that we want to lean into right now is thinking about the other side, right? Thinking about sort of how we can get through this. And that's the kind of glimmer of hope, the silver lining that I think would be really interesting, is for brands to start to talk about the strategies of what they're thinking about. Even seeing Trolls, right? The massive success that had with releasing that to digital download versus in theater. That's something that basically no theatrical company wanted to do for years, right? That was blasphemy. And that works now. So we're seeing the traditional models get broken, which is powerful.
Absolutely. That's a good point, and a good opportunity to pivot to more practical strategies. Obviously, we can't do the same level of production that we did before, which means that social media is an excellent medium for experimenting, for trying new things. We saw a really cool thing where Walgreens, it does its Red Nose Day every year for the nonprofit Comic Relief. They pivoted to support child poverty during the crisis, and they created a special filter that can be used on Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat. You can see that there, which was really cool. So what are some other creative ways that brands can use what they already have or use social media to create new campaigns?
Definitely. Look, Nike did a phenomenal job by just basically crowdsourcing celebrities working out in their home for their ad, right? Just basically collected all of that. We saw Domino's leaning into the fact that now there's, we're the Zoomers. I laughed the other day because it's like there's Gen Z and now there's going to be Gen Zoomer, right? And so they leaned into sort of a Zoom-filled spot saying they were hiring. And so I think those are kind of a couple elements where, look, you're using the tools that you have that are not necessarily highbrow in terms of production, right? But you're using it and you're creating something that's compelling and relatable. And going back to kind of the tenets we talked about, even if you're a small business all the way up to a brand like Nike, strikes a chord with people, right? Because that's part of the sort of the lifestyle that we're all living right now.
You also mentioned that in the playbook that marketers who are unable to develop new content are turning to influencers. So how can influencers be leveraged as part of this holistic social strategy?
Yeah, I think, look, this is a really great time where influencers can use their power to make some serious change. And so I think to the extent that even this past weekend, Mr. Beast held a competition with other, digital influencers like Casey Neistat and Tana and a bunch of others, and basically did a rock, paper, scissors competition, which was hysterical. And they raised over $1 million, right, for sort of going back to fighting COVID. I think that's a phenomenal thing. So I think brands can actually start to realize that there's a really powerful way to sidecar those opportunities and power that, right? Let the influencers influence, let them kind of always be organic and natural in their own way. But think about now the ways that you could kind of leverage an influencer to let them want to do something that feels near and dear to their heart, but almost sort of start to think about it as a full powered by, right? So I thought about it there. That was a live stream. At a certain point, I noticed there were some technical difficulties. So I thought, oh, that would have been phenomenal for, a telco or somebody at some nature to say like, hey, this is so-and-so powering Mr. Beast's, all day long live stream competition. And that's a great way for a brand to get involved. That would feel really, again, relevant, and it's actually leveraging influencers in a way and feels very, to me, natural, right? As opposed to sort of a forced sponsorship.
And so many influencers these days are millennials and Gen Zers. And all these people have grown up as digital natives and are used to using all these platforms that the rest of us have been sort of forced into. So how do you think that Gen Z and millennials can sort of lead this charge to develop the new normal or whatever comes after this?
Yeah, look, we saw this morning, I read the bullet that TikTok has over 2 billion downloads, right? And we've seen sort of the surge that's happened just in Q1, and we've seen the power of that platform really come alive in this time of quarantine. So I think we're really going to actually need to glean into what those are doing right now. And I think what's probably really powerful to take a step back for all of us that might be sort of, digital marketers, advertisers, brands, you're at home right now. Most of us with our children, I'm watching my daughter, I'm learning things about her in real time, and where I'm not on the road now, right? Or sort of seeing things, I'm actually finding some of the things that she's searching for and what she's doing. So actually what's found to be really interesting is I think a lot of, kudos to big brands. They're sensing a lot of the real timeness of the emergence of these platforms, and then they're leaning into that. And so, and again, we're seeing good and bad come out of that, but we're seeing a lot of good. And so I do think the sort of the younger generation is setting the tone for, quite frankly, where we think there's going to be platform dominance, where we think there's going to be the most sway and sort of, what's going to drive the most kind of advocacy or elicit change. And then also what's going to sort of elicit the most user behavior as well. And so that's really powerful. And I think social's always been a big question mark for a lot of brands, right? What's the ROI? How do we think about leveraging it in a more meaningful way? Now more than ever, we're seeing that social is here to stay. If anything, it's become not part of the new norm, but just the norm. And we always knew that, but it felt like it was a sidecar to linear and everything. But we're seeing that people are leaning into those platforms more than they ever have.
Can you speak a little more to what you think will be the lasting impacts of this more digital space on both the way we communicate on social and the way marketing operates in that space?
Yeah, look, it's always been said that social was kind of the front porch, right? It wasn't the end game, but it was the means to the end. Whether you're driving to a .com, you're trying to put butts in seats in the movie theater, whether you're trying to sell a vehicle or whatever it may be. But the reality of it is that I think social now more than anything has reverse engineering the model. And so coming out of this, because we might not have sports events for quite some time, we're going to be leaning into social. Because we might not have the ability for us to go and see a movie for a long time, we're going to have those conversations on social with friends. We might do co-viewing experiences with it on Zoom. And so that's a whole way for us to think about that social is completely changing the construct. A lot of where I believe that's going to happen is that entertainment, for example, the way we buy products is going to change forever. We might move to more e-commerce than we ever have. We might move to never wanting to leave our couch to watch movies ever again. And that's really disruptive, but that's positive disruption, right? Because now what's so exciting is it actually creates this resurgence. There's a new way where all of us that are marketers get to think about, great, like let's build the new playbook of tomorrow. And so I think that's what's really exciting as we kind of think about the emergence of new content creation due to production limitations, new technology and emerging platforms, and then basically the consumer and audience behavior shift.
Build the new playbook of tomorrow. I really like that. Well, that's about all the time we have. Thank you so much, John, for joining us today on Adweek Together. John is the General Manager of Brand Services at Fullscreen. And for those of you watching, thank you for joining us. On tomorrow's episode, Stephanie Patrick will talk with Erica Nardini, CEO of Barstool Sports, about the sports landscape and what it means for the spring seasons. Thanks, everybody, and see you tomorrow.